Elias Winter wasn't surprised when his mother slapped him. The impact snapped his head sideways. His cheek burned instantly. He lowered his eyes and said nothing. Experience had taught him silence was safer. The tiny apartment felt suffocating. Cigarette smoke lingered in the air. Empty bottles crowded the kitchen counter. Unpaid bills covered the table like a second tablecloth. Every surface seemed buried beneath evidence of another problem, another failure, another disaster. And somehow, according to his mother, all of it belonged to him. "This is your fault." The accusation arrived exactly on schedule. Elias remained standing beside the refrigerator. Bruises marked his arms beneath his oversized sweatshirt. His stomach growled quietly. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. His mother pointed at a stack of overdue notices. "If you weren't born, my life would have been different." The words barely registered anymore. He'd heard versions of them his entire life. Some people repeated favorite songs. His mother repeated resentments. Elias had become the target of all of them. The failed marriage, his fault. The missing money, his fault. The loneliness, his fault. Anything that went wrong eventually became his responsibility. Arguing never helped. Neither did apologizing. So he simply stood there, waiting for the storm to pass. Then someone knocked on the door. 3 hard knocks. The sound instantly changed the atmosphere. His mother's face lost color. Fear replaced anger. That frightened Elias more than the slap, because almost nothing scared her. Slowly, she opened the door. 3 men entered. Dark suits, hard expressions, dangerous eyes. Not police, not landlords, not ordinary debt collectors. Something worse. The tallest man glanced around the apartment. His expression remained unimpressed. "Payments overdue." His mother swallowed. "I need more time." The collector laughed, not kindly. "You already got more time." Silence followed. The tension became unbearable. Elias felt it immediately. Something was different today. The collectors weren't leaving empty-handed. Everyone seemed to understand that, including his mother. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time all morning. The expression in her eyes made his stomach twist. Calculation, cold, detached, like someone evaluating merchandise. Not family, not a son, merchandise. She pointed, directly at him. "Take him." The room fell silent. Even the collectors looked confused. The tall man frowned. "What?" "My son." Her voice remained steady, practical, almost businesslike. "Take him instead." For several seconds, nobody spoke. The suggestion hung in the air. Ugly, impossible, real. Elias felt something inside him break. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. Because deep down, he realized she meant it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't making a point. She was willing to trade him. The collector stared at her, then at Elias, clearly uncomfortable. "That's not how this works." His mother crossed her arms. "Then make it work." The apartment became painfully quiet. Elias stood frozen beside the refrigerator, unable to move, unable to think, unable to believe what he was hearing. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway, cold, calm, dangerously controlled. "How much?" Everyone turned. A tall alpha stood there. Dark suit, sharp eyes, absolute authority. The collectors immediately went pale. His mother stopped breathing, and Elias had never seen any of them look afraid before. The apartment fell completely silent. No one answered the question. No one even seemed capable of speaking. The alpha, standing in the doorway, waited patiently, which somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Elias had never seen him before, but judging by the reaction around the room, everyone else knew exactly who he was. The debt collectors suddenly looked nervous. His mother looked terrified. The tallest collector straightened immediately. Boss. The single word carried unmistakable respect and fear. The alpha stepped inside. Expensive shoes against worn flooring, perfectly tailored suit against peeling walls. The contrast felt unreal. His gaze swept across the apartment. The unpaid bills, the empty bottles, the bruises on Elias's face. Nothing escaped his attention. Finally, his eyes returned to the collector. How much? The question came again. Calm. Simple. The collector hesitated. Boss, this situation doesn't concern. The alpha looked at him. Just looked. The man stopped speaking instantly. A few seconds passed. Then the collector quietly named a figure. A large amount. Far larger than anything Elias had imagined. The alpha didn't react. He reached into his jacket, removed a checkbook, wrote something, signed it, then handed it over. Just like that, the debt disappeared. The collector stared at the check. His eyes widened. It's paid? Yes. The alpha's voice remained emotionless. Leave. Nobody argued. Within moments, the collectors were gone. The apartment felt strangely empty afterward. Too quiet, too still. Elias remained exactly where he was, waiting for the catch. Because there had to be one. People didn't spend that kind of money for strangers. Not in real life. His mother apparently had the same thought. She found her voice first. What do you want? The alpha turned toward her. For the first time, genuine dislike appeared in his expression. It wasn't dramatic, just absolute. The sort of look reserved for things beneath respect. Then he looked at Elias. Nothing? His mother blinked. What? I don't want anything. The answer confused everyone, especially Elias. The alpha stepped closer. Not threateningly, simply close enough to be heard clearly. What is your name? Elias. His voice sounded smaller than intended. The alpha nodded once. I'm Damien Moretti. The name meant nothing to Elias. The reaction from his mother suggested it should. Fear returned immediately. Damien studied him carefully. The bruises, the thin frame, the exhaustion, things most people ignored. Finally, he made a decision. Come with me. Elias blinked. The request felt absurd. Why? A reasonable question. Perhaps the most reasonable question of the day. Damien considered it briefly, then gave an answer nobody expected. Because apparently, I'm the first person in this room who understands you aren't property. The words hit harder than the slap earlier, harder than the debt, harder than being offered as payment, because nobody had ever said something like that before. Not to him, not about him. His mother laughed nervously. You can't just take him. Damien turned toward her. The smile he gave wasn't pleasant. It was the smile of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. Watch me. Silence followed. Heavy, final. Elias looked around the apartment. The place he'd spent his entire life. The place where every room carried bad memories. The place nobody had ever protected him. Then he looked at Damien, at the open doorway behind him, at the possibility of something different. For the first time in years, someone had offered him a choice, and despite the fear twisting in his stomach, Elias found himself taking a step forward, then another, leaving the apartment behind, leaving his mother behind, leaving the life he'd always known behind. He had no idea where Damien Moretti was taking him, only that it couldn't possibly be worse than where he'd been. Elias didn't sleep the first night, or the second, or the third. The mansion was too quiet, too comfortable, too strange. His bedroom alone was larger than the apartment he had spent his entire life in. The bed felt impossibly soft. The bathroom looked like something from a luxury magazine. Even the windows overlooked carefully maintained gardens instead of cracked parking lots. None of it felt real. People like him didn't end up in places like this. At least, that was what his life had taught him. So he waited for the catch, waited for the punishment, waited for Damien Moretti to demand repayment. Nothing happened. Instead, a doctor arrived. The man treated old injuries without asking uncomfortable questions. Several bruises required medical attention. 2 healed fractures suggested previous abuse. The doctor documented everything quietly, then left. The next day, new clothes appeared in his room. They fit perfectly. The day after that, someone asked what foods he liked. The question genuinely confused him. Nobody had ever asked before. The household staff treated him politely, not cautiously, not reluctantly, politely, as if respect were normal. The experience felt unsettling. By the end of the week, Elias had become suspicious. No one could be this kind, not without wanting something. One afternoon, he finally gathered enough courage to confront Damien. The alpha sat in a home office overlooking the gardens. Stacks of documents covered the desk. Several bodyguards waited outside. The entire scene reminded Elias exactly how powerful the man truly was. Still, he forced himself to speak. "Why are you doing this?" Damien glanced up from a report. "Doing what?" "Helping me." The answer seemed obvious. Apparently not. Damien studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Do you think everything has a price?" Elias immediately answered, "Yes." The honesty surprised neither of them. For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Then Damien nodded slowly. "That makes sense." No argument, no lecture, just understanding. Somehow, that felt worse, because part of Elias wanted to be proven wrong, wanted someone to explain why kindness existed. Damien returned to his paperwork. The conversation appeared finished. Then he spoke again. "You don't owe me anything." Elias frowned. People kept saying impossible things around him. The alpha continued reading. "As far as I'm concerned, helping someone shouldn't require a contract." The statement lingered long after Elias left the office. Over the following weeks, life settled into a routine. Regular meals, regular sleep, medical treatment, safety, simple things he never realized he lacked until he had them. Slowly, the constant tension inside him began easing. Not disappearing, just easing. For the first time in years, he stopped listening for footsteps outside his bedroom door. Stopped flinching whenever someone entered a room. Stopped expecting every good moment to end badly. The changes were small, but they mattered. One evening, Damien watched him laugh at something a staff member said. Only briefly, only for a second. Yet the sight caught his attention, because it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from Elias. And suddenly, the alpha became curious. People didn't survive 19 years of abuse without leaving behind secrets. The bruises told part of the story, not all of it. The following morning, Damien summoned his chief investigator. "I want a full background report." The investigator nodded. "On whom?" Damien looked toward the garden where Elias was reading quietly. "Everything you can find." Something about the boy's history didn't add up, and Damien intended to discover why. The investigation took 3 weeks. That alone was unusual. Most background reports took days. A week at most. Yet every time Damien's investigators searched for information about Elias Winter, they encountered obstacles, missing records, altered documents, files that should have existed, but didn't. The deeper they dug, the stranger things became. By the time the final report reached Damien's desk, his chief investigator looked genuinely disturbed. "You're not going to like this." Damien opened the folder. The first few pages seemed ordinary enough. Birth records, school reports, medical history. Then the names changed, and everything stopped making sense. Elias's father wasn't who everyone believed he was. For 19 years, official records described him as an unemployed Omega who died shortly after Elias was born. The records were false, every single one. The real Nathaniel Winter belonged to one of the wealthiest Omega families in the country, a family with estates, investments, businesses, generational wealth worth millions. Damien reread the page twice, then a third time. What happened? The investigator sat across from him. After Nathaniel died, several relatives gained control of the estate. A pause. They also gained control of the records. Damien understood immediately. Money changed people. Large amounts of money changed them even faster. They erased him. The investigator nodded. More importantly, they erased Elias. The room became silent, because that explained everything. If Elias disappeared legally, no inheritance needed distributing. No questions needed answering. No challenges to the estate existed. The solution was brutal, simple, profitable. The report continued. Damien's expression darkened with every page. The relatives didn't merely steal the inheritance. They protected the theft. Carefully, systematically, for years. Bank records revealed regular payments sent anonymously to Elias's mother. Not enough to make her wealthy, enough to keep her dependent, enough to keep her drinking, enough to ensure she never asked questions. The arrangement benefited everyone involved, except Elias, especially Elias. The investigator pointed toward another document. "Look at the transfer dates." Damien did. His jaw tightened immediately. The payments increased whenever Elias approached adulthood, whenever legal questions might arise, whenever curiosity became dangerous. Someone was actively ensuring he remained trapped, poor, uneducated, powerless. The realization was infuriating, not because of the money, because of the cruelty. A child had spent 19 years suffering so adults could protect stolen assets. The inheritance itself remained largely intact. Properties, accounts, investments. Enough wealth to completely transform a life. Enough wealth that people committed crimes to keep it. Damien closed the folder slowly. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, the investigator broke the silence. "There's more." Damien raised an eyebrow. "The inheritance may still legally belong to him." The statement changed everything. A path existed. Difficult, complicated, but possible. The stolen fortune wasn't gone. It had merely been hidden behind lies. For the first time since the investigation began, Damien smiled, not pleasantly, not kindly, the sort of smile that made powerful people nervous. Because somewhere in the city, several wealthy relatives believed their secret remained safe. They believed Elias Winter was powerless, forgotten, disposable. They were wrong, and very soon they were going to discover exactly how wrong. Elias thought Damien wanted to discuss legal paperwork. Instead, the Alpha changed his entire understanding of the past. The meeting took place in the library, a quiet room lined with bookshelves and tall windows. Elias arrived carrying a notebook. He left carrying a lifetime of questions. Damien placed a thick folder on the table. "We found information about your father." The words immediately captured his attention. His father had always been a mystery, a shadow, a name nobody discussed. Whenever Elias asked questions as a child, his mother became angry. Eventually, he stopped asking. It seemed easier, safer. Now, Damien pushed the folder toward him. Read. Elias opened it cautiously. The first photograph stopped him cold. A smiling Omega stood beside a garden fountain. Dark hair, gray eyes that looked startlingly familiar. His own eyes. For several seconds, Elias couldn't breathe. That's him? Damien nodded. Nathaniel Winter. The name felt strange. Real. The next pages contained school records, business achievements, family photos, evidence of a life completely different from the one Elias imagined. His father wasn't a failure. He wasn't irresponsible. He wasn't a man who abandoned his family. The truth was the opposite. Then Elias discovered the letters. Dozens of them. Carefully preserved copies. Written before Nathaniel's death. Letters intended for a future son. Letters Elias was never supposed to see. His hands trembled slightly as he read. If you're reading this someday, I hope you know how much I wanted to meet you. The words blurred. He blinked rapidly, then continued. I don't know what kind of person you'll become, but I already love you. Silence filled the library. Elias stared at the page. The sentence felt impossible. For 19 years, he had assumed his father didn't care, didn't stay, didn't try. Now every assumption was collapsing. Letter after letter revealed the same thing. Hope, excitement, love, plans for the future, dreams about teaching his son to read, travel, build a life, simple things, normal things, things that never happened. By the time Elias reached the final page, his eyes burned. He quickly looked away, embarrassed. Damien pretended not to notice. The gesture felt strangely kind. After several moments, Elias finally spoke. My mother said he left. Damien remained quiet, allowing him to reach the conclusion himself. Elias looked back at the photographs, at the letters, at the evidence. He didn't. No. The answer was gentle, certain. The room became silent again. Everything he believed about himself suddenly felt unstable. If his father loved him, if his inheritance was stolen, if his childhood was built on lies, then who was he really? The question lingered, uncomfortable, necessary. Eventually, Damien slid another folder across the table. Legal documents, financial records, evidence. The inheritance case begins next week. Elias looked up. The inheritance is real? Damien almost smiled. Very real. For the first time, hope stirred beneath the confusion. Small, fragile, dangerous, yet impossible to ignore, because somewhere beyond the lies, in stolen years, the truth was finally waiting, and Elias intended to claim it. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, half the city knew about the inheritance case. By the following week, the entire state seemed to be discussing it. A forgotten heir, a stolen fortune, corrupt relatives. The story practically wrote itself. Elias hated the attention. Unfortunately, he hated the next part even more. His mother returned. The mansion's front gates opened one rainy afternoon. Security informed Damien that a woman was demanding to see Elias. The name alone told him exactly why she was there. Money had a remarkable ability to resurrect relationships. Elias met her in a private sitting room. The moment she entered, she burst into tears. Real tears, or at least convincing ones. Oh, Elias. She rushed forward, arms open, as though they were a loving family reunited after tragedy. Elias remained seated. The performance faltered immediately. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she began talking, rapidly, emotionally. Apologies poured from her lips. Excuses followed. She blamed stress, poverty, depression, bad decisions. Anything except herself. Most of all, she claimed she always loved him. The statement should have hurt. Instead, It exhausted him. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't listening like a frightened child. He was listening like an adult. And adults noticed contradictions. "You don't understand what I went through." The familiar sentence appeared again. Elias almost laughed. His entire childhood seemed built around those words. Across the room, Damien sat quietly, observing, waiting. The conversation continued. His mother's tears intensified. Her voice broke repeatedly. The performance improved with every passing minute. Eventually, she reached the point she truly wanted. "We can be a family again." There it was, the real objective, the inheritance, the future, the opportunity. Elias saw it clearly now. Perhaps he always should have. Before he could answer, Damien placed a folder onto the table. The room immediately grew quieter. His mother stared at it nervously. "What is that?" "Evidence." Damien's voice remained calm. The word alone changed everything. He opened the folder. Inside sat years of financial records, bank transfers, phone logs, payment histories, every secret transaction connected to the stolen inheritance, every payment she received, every deposit made to keep her cooperative. Her face lost color. Rapidly, Elias watched the transformation. For the first time, the truth became visible, not because of what Damien said, because of her reaction. The records exposed everything. She knew exactly where the money came from. She accepted it willingly, year after year, while allowing her son to suffer. The silence stretched, heavy, unavoidable. Finally, she looked at Elias. Desperation replaced confidence. "It's not what it looks like." The words sounded weak. Even she seemed aware of it, because some lies collapse the moment sunlight touches them. This was one of them. For a long moment, Elias simply stared. Then, something unexpected happened. He stopped searching for excuses, stopped trying to explain her behavior, stopped protecting her from consequences. For the first time in 19 years, he allowed the truth to stand on its own. And the truth was devastating. The room remained silent after the evidence was revealed. No one rushed to fill it. No one tried to soften the truth. For years, Elias would have. He would have explained, defended, forgiven before an apology was even offered. Not anymore. His mother sat rigidly in her chair. The folder remained open on the table between them. Every page exposed another lie, another payment, another choice, and for once, there was no way to blame anyone else. "You knew." The words left Elias quietly. Not accusing, not angry, just factual. His mother flinched. "I didn't have a choice." The answer came automatically, like a reflex. Elias almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. There was always an excuse, always a reason, always someone else responsible. He looked down at the records. You had thousands of choices. The statement hit harder than shouting ever could. His mother opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew he was right. Every payment represented a decision. Every year represented another opportunity to stop, to tell the truth, to protect him. She chose differently, again and again. The realization settled heavily over the room. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, she whispered the question she had been avoiding. "Can you forgive me?" Elias stared at her. The answer wasn't simple, because forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. He understood that now, perhaps for the first time. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair. "I don't hate you." Her eyes widened slightly. Hope appeared, too quickly. Elias noticed and continued. "But I don't trust you either." The hope faded, replaced by pain. Real pain this time. Not performed, not manipulated, real. Part of him felt sorry for her. Another part remembered 19 years of bruises, fear, loneliness. Neither feeling erased the other. They simply existed together. His mother lowered her gaze. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. What happens now? The question sounded smaller than before, almost frightened. Elias thought about it carefully, then answered honestly. I move forward. No anger, no revenge, just truth. He couldn't build a future while carrying her choices forever. That wasn't his responsibility. It never had been. Across the room, Damien remained silent, watching, allowing Elias to handle the conversation himself. The respect meant more than words could express. Because nobody was rescuing him this time, he was rescuing himself. Eventually, his mother stood, slowly, as though carrying a weight she finally recognized. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something else, an apology, an excuse, a plea. Instead, she nodded once, then walked toward the door. Halfway there, she stopped. Without turning around, she spoke. I did love you. The words lingered in the air, complicated, painful, perhaps even true. Elias didn't answer, because love without protection had shaped his entire childhood, and he was no longer willing to confuse the two. The door closed softly behind her. For several seconds, he remained seated, breathing, thinking, healing. Then, Damien placed a hand on his shoulder. A simple gesture, steady, supportive. And for the first time, Elias realized something important. He hadn't lost a mother that day. He had simply stopped pretending he still had one. Meanwhile, the inheritance case was finally reaching court. And soon, the people who stole his future would face the truth as well. The inheritance case ended on a Thursday morning. After months of investigations, hearings, and evidence, the verdict took less than an hour. The judge reviewed the records, the financial transfers, the forged documents, the altered legal filings, then ruled exactly as Damien's legal team expected. The estate belonged to Elias Winter. It always had. The stolen properties were returned. The investment accounts were restored. The remaining assets were transferred into his name. The relatives who orchestrated the fraud faced criminal investigations of their own. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the truth carried legal weight. Everyone congratulated Elias afterward. Lawyers shook his hand. Reporters tried asking questions. Financial advisors appeared almost immediately. Yet standing on the courthouse steps, Elias felt strangely detached. The money mattered. Of course it mattered. Financial security changed lives. But the victory didn't feel as important as everyone expected, because the biggest thing he gained wasn't wealth. It was freedom. The freedom to stop surviving. The freedom to start living. That realization followed him home. And for the first time, he found himself calling the mansion home. The thought surprised him. Months earlier, he couldn't imagine feeling comfortable there. Now, he knew the names of every staff member. He had favorite places to read, favorite meals, favorite routines. The house no longer felt temporary. Neither did the people inside it. That evening, the household celebrated quietly. Nothing extravagant. A private dinner, good food, laughter, conversation, normal things. The kind of things Elias once thought existed only in movies. At one point, he looked around the table, the staff, the security team, even Damien, people talking, teasing one another, sharing stories. The realization arrived unexpectedly. This was family. Not the family he was born into, the family he found, or perhaps the family that found him. Across the table, Damien noticed his expression. What? Elias smiled. Nothing. The answer fooled absolutely no one. Damien raised an eyebrow. Elias laughed softly, then admitted the truth. I was just thinking. Dangerous hobby. Several people at the table chuckled. Elias rolled his eyes. Somehow, Damien always managed to sound serious and sarcastic at the same time. The conversation moved on, yet the feeling remained. Warm, steady, real. Later that night, Elias stood in the mansion's library. The inheritance documents sat neatly organized on a nearby desk. Millions of dollars, properties, investments, a future most people would envy. And yet, none of it felt as valuable as the people surrounding him. The realization surprised him. Then again, perhaps it shouldn't have. Money could buy security, comfort, opportunity. It couldn't buy belonging. That came from somewhere else. The following morning, he found Damien reviewing paperwork in his office. A question had been bothering him for months. One he never quite gathered the courage to ask. Until now. Elias stepped inside. Damien looked up. Something wrong? Elias shook his head. No. Then he hesitated. Only briefly. There's just something I want to know. The Alpha set down his pen. Waiting, patient. And for the first time since they met, Elias finally asked the question that mattered most. Why did you help me? Damien didn't answer immediately. For a long moment, he simply looked out the office window. The city stretched beneath them, countless lights glowing against the evening sky. Elias waited, patiently. The question had lived in his mind for months. He could wait a little longer. Finally, Damien leaned back in his chair. You really want to know? Elias nodded. Yes. A faint smile appeared. Not amused, thoughtful, as though Damien was sorting through memories. The day I met you, he began, everyone in that apartment was looking at you the same way. Elias frowned. What way? The Alpha's expression hardened slightly. Like you didn't matter. The words landed quietly, yet they carried tremendous weight. Damien continued. Your mother saw a debt. The collectors saw a problem. A room full of people looked at you and decided your value depended on what you could be traded for. Silence filled the office, because it was true, painfully true. For most of his life, Elias measured his worth through other people's opinions, their approval, their anger, their disappointment, their needs, never his own. Damien folded his hands together. Then I looked at you. A pause. And I saw someone waiting for permission. Elias blinked. Permission? To matter? The answer stole his breath. Because somehow, Damien had described 19 years of his life in 2 words. Permission to matter. Permission to take up space. Permission to exist without apologizing. Permission to be more than a burden. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Damien shrugged lightly. I got tired of watching people tell you that you didn't. Emotion tightened Elias's throat. Unexpected. Powerful. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. After everything that happened, the inheritance, the court case, the lies exposed, that simple explanation affected him most. Because it wasn't about money, or pity, or charity. It was about being seen. Truly seen. The realization settled deeply inside him. Years ago, his mother looked at him and saw a mistake. The relatives who stole his inheritance saw an obstacle. Everyone who benefited from his suffering saw something useful to exploit. Only Damien looked at him and saw a person. Nothing more, nothing less. A person. And somehow, that changed everything. Later that evening, Elias stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind carried the sounds of distant traffic and laughter. Below, life continued. Busy, messy, ordinary. He thought about the apartment, the bruises, The fear, the day his mother tried to sell him. For years, that memory felt like proof of his worthlessness. Now it felt different. Now it felt like the beginning. A terrible ending. A miraculous beginning. Because the day someone treated him like property was also the day someone else refused to. And that refusal changed the course of his life. Years later, newspapers would write articles about his success. People would admire his wealth, his business achievements, his philanthropy. They would marvel at how far he had come. Few would understand the truth. The most valuable thing Elias Winter ever received wasn't an inheritance. It was a chance to discover he had never been worthless, never been a burden, never been for sale. And once he understood that, nobody could ever convince him otherwise.